So to understand Gaza, one needs to understand only one fact. That is all. And the fact is that 80% of Gaza's residents, 1.4 million people, despite having been born in Gaza and having lived there all their lives, view themselves and are registered by an agency called UNRWA as refugees from Palestine. Now, I think we can all agree that Gaza is Palestinian territory. Israel is not there. Israel makes no territorial demands on Gaza. Gaza is Palestine. So, if 1.4 million people who live in Gaza have never been displaced by war, have been born there, their parents have been born there, their grandparents have been born there, by now their great-grandparents have been born there, if they view themselves and are considered as refugees from Palestine, which Palestine exactly are they refugees from? Well, in their mind, it's very clear. They are refugees from a Palestine that is from the river to the sea, a Palestine that will replace Israel, that will be instead of Israel. As a result, those 1.4 million people, 80% of Gaza's residents, continue to demand something that they call a right of return. It is worth noting that such a right does not exist. Palestinians quote UN General Assembly Resolution 194 as granting them that right. Read the resolution. It does not. It does not grant the right, and a UN General Assembly resolution does not grant a right to begin with, no matter how many times it says it. I'm sure you know one of the favorite quotes of our legendary ambassador to the United Nations, Abba Eban, once said that if Algeria introduced a resolution declaring that the earth was flat and that Israel had flattened it, it would pass by a vote of 164 in favor to 13 against and 26 abstentions. And yet the earth remains round. So the fact that the UN General Assembly might say that there's such a right does not give a right. What is important in the international system is the principle of sovereignty. Israel is a sovereign state, and like all sovereign states, it has the right to determine who enters its borders. So when the Palestinians living in Gaza demand return into Israel, despite never having lived there, claiming that it is a right that trumps Israeli sovereignty, the basic principle of the UN system, of the international system, they are basically seeking to erase Israeli sovereignty, to settle inside Israel, and given the numbers, to turn it into a majority Arab state where Jews will be a minority, apparently the only role that Jews can have. So when Palestinians keep on demanding return, despite living very much in their own territory, they are basically saying, Gaza is not enough. We will never settle for it. The West Bank is not enough. 800,000 of the West Bank's residents living in the Palestinian Authority see themselves as refugees from Palestine. They're basically saying they will not rest until, as they say in their demonstrations, Palestine from the river to the sea will be free, should we add, of Jews. That is their vision. This means that they don't think Gaza is their home. Despite having lived there their entire lives, 4, 5 generations, despite it being Palestinian territory, they don't think Gaza is their home. This is why they have no interest in turning Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East. This is why all the hundreds of millions that have been given over the decades to Gaza will continue to be wasted, to be converted into tunnels into the ground. Because imagine this, If a person lives in a place but believes that it's not their home, and they're given cement or money, will they use that cement or money to build a home which they don't think is their home? They will use that money and cement to build tunnels in order to take what they believe is their real home, despite never having lived there. So when Palestinians march on the borders of Gaza with Israel, notice that they never march on the border with Egypt. Gaza has a border with Egypt. They never march on that border. They don't march in the name of independence. The marches are not called the marches for an independent Palestinian state. They're not called the marches to end the blockade. They are called very clearly the marches for return, the marches to take Israel, to make it an Arab state. They are very clear on why they are marching. This is why they are marching on the border with Israel and not on the border with Egypt, because they have no interest in taking Egypt. So when they are marching on the borders with Israel in the name of return, it needs to be understood very clearly as a declaration of war. It is nothing less than that. The Israeli response cannot be understood if this is not understood. If one thinks that these are some protests within a country, it makes no sense. It only makes sense when one understands what these marches of return really are. A people marching on a border with another sovereign state with the expressed demand, with the expressed declaration that that state should not exist and that they should take it over. I can think of no clearer declaration of war in international law. When we understand that, that's when we begin to understand what's happening in Gaza. That's when we begin to understand why the people of Gaza refuse to develop Gaza. They will only begin to turn their considerable energies and talents towards developing Gaza, towards making Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East, if they finally accept that their future is in Gaza, that they need to build a future in that land, that the world will be with them, that Israelis will be with them, I will be with them, if they say to the world, we want to build a state of our own in the West Bank and Gaza, but we understand that the Jewish people, no less than us, have a right to a sovereign state, have the universal right to self-determination in a land which is also their homeland. But as long as the Palestinians remain committed to the idea that it is more important to struggle for a Palestine from the river to the sea than to have a state of their own in part of that territory, they will continue what is by now more than a 70-year war against the right of the Jewish people to self-determination, even in part of the land. I invented a word to explain much of what goes on, not just here in this chamber and in this building, but around the world. It's a word called Westplaining. Many of you by now have heard the word mansplaining. Mansplaining, I'm sure you know, is when men explain what a woman has just said. It happens to me sometimes. But Westplaining is when Western diplomats and journalists explain away what Palestinians have just said. We saw that during those marches of return. A New York Times journalist came to do a video piece on what these marches are about, what people are fighting for. And he interviews them. And he goes by one, and they say, this is my land. And they talk about the state of Israel, and I will take it back. Another one, a young person, says, I'm from village so-and-so. He clearly is not. He is a young person. That village does not exist anymore, and it is in the state of Israel. Yet he says he's from there, and he says, I will go back. And the land was stolen from me, and I will take it back. And Palestine from the river to the sea. They all say the same things. And then this New York Times journalist finishes the report and says, these people are protesting the dire conditions in Gaza. This is West-plaining. It's a refusal to listen. I believe it's a neo-colonial attitude that refuses to view the Arabs and Palestinians as equals, to take them at their word. They tell you what they're fighting for, and you West-plain it away. Oh, they're just angry. Oh, it's the conditions in Gaza. But it's exactly the opposite. Give them the respect of listening to what they say. They are telling you that they're willing to suffer, they're willing to sacrifice, that they don't want a state in the West Bank and Gaza with its capital in East Jerusalem if the price of that state means accepting, legitimizing, and coming to terms with the equal Jewish claim to a state in the same territory. If they have to forgo their demand for return in order to be sovereign in part of the land, they prefer, it's a choice, to give it up and to continue fighting, sacrificing. And they say very clearly, yes, it might be humiliating to live under current conditions, but at least they are not subject to what is in their mind the far greater humiliation of legitimizing the equal Jewish right to self-determination in part of the land. So everything is upside down. You want to understand Gaza, understand that 80% of Gaza's residents don't think of Gaza as their home, merely as a temporary launching pad, even though they lived there 5 generations by now, as a temporary launching pad to take Israel, to take over Israel, to have Palestine from the river to the sea. For that, they are willing to fight. That is why they are marching on the border, and it is nothing less than a declaration of war against the sovereign state of Israel within its 1967 lines. Thank you.